Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. We're continuing a conversation with Brant Garder. He's the author of Plates of Mormon, as well as Engraven Upon Plates, written upon paper. We're going to talk about his version of the Book of Mormon that he has and compare it to other Book of Mormons. We'll also talk about the scripture White Delightsome. Is that a racist scripture? We'll also talk about whether there's King James or William Tyndale English in the Book of Mormon. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. I've got lots of different questions there. And maybe this is fresh on my mind. I just interviewed Matt Harris, and
yeah.
Did you have a chance to see that by chance?
No, I read the book.
Okay. It's fantastic. One of the things that Matt talks about in my interview is the White and Delightsome scripture.
Yes.
And, how does that relate to black members of the church? Because Nephi talks about the skin of darkness. And so, Matt doesn't care whether it's white and delightsome, pure and delightsome. Joseph Smith made both the changes, or, translated them both. So he sees that as a problematic theology, especially because black members of the church, even though it's talking about Lamanites, they look at that and say, how does that apply to me? So how would you respond to that? Is that a racist scripture?
It's a racist reading.
Okay.
And the only thing I was even mildly disappointed about when I read his book is there is a footnote when he's talking about that, and he says there are some modern scholars who are talking about how this is metaphorical in the Book of Mormon and not related to skin pigmentation. And I actually got my name mentioned.
Oh, you were footnoted too.
Yeah, I was one of those. And basically
I was so proud I was footnoted.
I was footnoted, yeah, in a book where I would not have expected it. But at the end of that, he says, but they don't talk about the fact that people believe that that became part of the culture of the church.
Yeah.
And he's correct, because that wasn't what we're doing. So let's make the dichotomy here. What would I say about that? First of all, what I say is I'm a Book of Mormon guy. I'm not a Book of Mormon reception scholar. I am not about how did people take what's in the Book of Mormon and adapt it into their own theology. How did they use the Book of Mormon? That is a different story. And the White and Delightsome story that is so bad that really, really did affect so many people, that bad theology is a reading of the text, but not an understanding of the text. So the question is, if you go back to the Book of Mormon, what does the Book of Mormon actually teach? Well, that line is in there. And because it says skin and it says blackness, the culture of the United States is so well known to have had the culture of slavery that you see black skin, you're going, I know exactly what that means. But it didn't.
So you don't think Nephi meant it that way? Meant it the way we read it?
Yeah, it didn't mean it the way we read it. And the question is how do I know that? Well, here is part of the problem that we have with the Book of Mormon. We speak English. The Book of Mormon was given to us in English, and we forget that there was ever in any other language. So, of course, we assume that the Nephites spoke English. And when they wrote something down, we have exactly what they wrote in exactly the way they wrote it, with the exact same meaning that we have. And because you were in Ben Spackman's class talking about how words change and concepts change over time.
That was really interesting, by the way.
Yeah. And you cannot be a scholar of any ancient text and not understand problems of translation and problems. And so the question is, okay, we have this word in English. I have no way to check the original. If I were a scholar and I had a manuscript in Hawaiian and one in English, and I had a problem with English, I'd try to go back to the Hawaiian to find out what they were saying. I don't have that.
Yeah.
So how do I know? What can I find out? Well, you can start looking at what happens in the text. Look at the events of the text. Look at the way it's using those things. And when you do that, you find out that when they talk about skin, they're talking about appearance. But when they're talking about appearance, they're talking about it in very much the way that you got it in the ancient Mediterranean, which is you can see the person's insides on the outside. If you were a good person, it showed on your face. There was something about your countenance that would show that you were a good person inside. If you were an evil person, that would show on the outside. And so it says skin because that shows on the outside, and it's using it that way. Now, again, how do you know that? You look at other places where black and white are used in the text. And we know, of course, that Nephites are white, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus Christ comes and he's got his apostles there. The apostles are all Nephites, therefore white, right? And he's praying, and as he's praying, he says, and my apostles became white. I thought they were white. What happens? How did the white become white? Well, because whatever they were culturally, genetically, in that moment, a spirit came over them, and the whiteness and the brightness and the light, those all get mixed together. And so how did the white Nephites become white? Well, it has nothing to do with skin color. It has to do with states of righteousness. Then you say, well, can I see anything? Is there any place in the Book of Mormon where it's obvious that there's a skin pigmentation difference? Because you would think if I've got a group of people and they're two different pigmentations, such as Caucasian and African, you might notice the difference. Mm-hmm. You might be able to say, I can see that you two don't look exactly alike. Never happens. Never happens. And there's a place where it should.
What about the dark and loathsome? God made the Lamanites dark and loathsome so that white Lamanite or white Nephites wouldn't marry. They would
again,
seem dirty.
If we go back to, again, what we get out of the ancient Mediterranean, this idea that what you are inside becomes visible on the outside. Of course, you're dark and loathsome. Those things go together. And
that's a kenning?
Yeah. I mean, it works a lot like a kenning. But it's one of these, it's a spiritual righteousness kind of thing. And again, never happens with skin color. Here's the case where it should have made a difference and didn't. Captain Moroni again, good old Captain Moroni wants to free some slaves or free some captive Nephites. And so the Lamanites have them. And he says, how am I going to get these out of here? He says, what I really want to do is get the guards drunk.
Right.
Which is, great tactic. Great Book of Mormon tactic. Let's go get everybody drunk. And so he says, I need to have them. I need to find a Lamanite to go. And so he searches through his army and he finds a Lamanite. Good, you're a Lamanite. I need you to lead this and go and get these other Lamanites drunk. Well, you go, well, of course, right? Because obviously if there's skin color, he's going to notice if they're supposed to be black and these white guys show up. It's going to be able to see something, right? So they find the one Lamanite and they send him off with about 5 or 6 other guys who aren't Lamanites, who must be Nephites, who must be white, and he must be black. And the Lamanite guards never look at it and go, one black guy, 4 or 5 white guys. This is suspicious. Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. They don't notice. So then the question becomes, well, why did he have to find a Lamanite? Well, language, culture, accent, all of those kinds of things. There are reasons why people from some region, if I'm going to pretend, if I want to do something with someone who is in the deep south of the United States, and I want to kind of get an in, my accent isn't going to go very far. I need somebody else who speaks with a nice drawl to be able to do that. But yeah, the one Lamanite, 4 or 5 other guys, they don't notice. Trust me, if it was one black guy and 5 white guys, they would have noticed. In modern basketball, we watch basketball games and go, look at that, man, there's a white guy on the floor. I can see a white guy on the floor. We notice these differences, but they didn't. You never see any action in the Book of Mormon. So much so that when the Amalekites, probably pronounced Amalekite, when they're fleeing towards the Lamanites, think about, and there's an alliance that's already gone on before. That becomes clear in the story that the Lamanites know, and that they know who the Amalekites are, and they're already planning on merging together. But think of what happens if you're the Lamanites and all of a sudden this group of people start running up toward you with weapons. How do you know they're friendly? Well, they have to mark their forehead. They can't, there's nothing else about them that lets you know. So you have to, paint something in the forehead. So yeah, when you see the white on there or the red on my forehead, then you'll know I'm supposed to be a friend. But yeah, you never see anything where the skin pigmentation makes any difference anywhere in the story. And if it were really true, that would show up. It's sort of like the argument about snow in the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon will mention, snow in poetry coming from the Old World. But I lived in Albany, New York. I went through several. The reason I live in Albuquerque is after several snowstorms week after week where we had 5 or 6 inches of snow, my wife said, I'm leaving, you can come if you'd like. You do not live 1,000 years in a place that has deep snow for that length of time and forget to mention it.
Now, wait a minute. Albuquerque's pretty high. Don't you get a lot of snow in Albuquerque?
No, we don't.
Oh, you don't? How high is Albuquerque?
We're 5,000 feet, yeah.
And you don't get snow?
Rarely.
Really?
It's not unusual that we will get once, maybe twice a year, quarter inch, half inch, or something like that. Every once in a while now we'll get, 2 inches or so. And then a really rare event comes, and we had one of those, now it's maybe 20 years ago. But we had 2 weeks in a row that dumped over a foot of snow on us.
Huh.
Shut the whole city down because we don't have snow plows. There was no way to get around. We had people with 2x4s scraping their driveways because nobody owns snow shovels. I came from the Northeast. I had snow shovels. So I brought my snow shovels. And I was, I did my driveway and I did a neighbor's driveway. And I wasn't going to do everybody in the neighborhood. A lot of driveways. But yeah, nobody has snow shovels. Yeah, we just don't get it there.
I'm surprised to hear that.
Yeah. But yeah, coming in from the Northeast, oh my, yes.
I know. I know what this is.
Every year I said, I'm getting a snowplow. I'm getting one. And I never did. We lived there for 18 years. I never did get one. I always wished I had. And then I came to Albuquerque and I said, okay, well, now I'm finally glad I don't have one other than that.
Huh. Anyway, you were talking about snow.
Talking about
snow is where it usually comes in.
Back to the point of action in the text. The absence of snow. If there were that much snow, it would get mentioned somehow. If there is a pigmentation difference, somebody's going to notice it. And when I talk, people will ask me about anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, and the horse always comes up. And there are now, by the way, some authenticated horse bones that have been carbon-14 dated that predate the conquest. So it does seem that we have some, after the Book of Mormon, but before the Spanish horses.
How far back? Not prehistoric.
1100, AD 1100.
Huh.
After the Book of Mormon, not before. So not the Eohippus. We're not going back into 13,000 before. So there are some bones, but that isn't even the point for the Book of Mormon. How do you know in the text what something means? So obviously we have the word horse, and we conjure up exactly what a horse is because we know what that word means. But the question is, what the English word horse translated something. What was it? Well, we don't know. Can't know. Was it a horse? Well, maybe. But what do we know about horses in the Book of Mormon? Well, you look at the text, and in the text, we know that horses eat because Ammon fed them. Okay? We know that they can move because we see in another line, there is a long line of animals that they mention that are being cleared off of the land for a scorched earth before the one version of the Gadianton robbers. And they mention horses as moving. So horses are alive, horses can eat, and horses can move. We know that much. We know that there's some association with the chariot because they, prepare the chariot. But we don't know what the word chariot translated, and we have no idea what the horse does with the chariot. It says, go prepare my horse and my chariot. Well, we think, that means the horse pulls the chariot. But that isn't in the text. That isn't what it says. It just says, go prepare them. I don't know what the relationship is. This long line of animals, every other animal in there is a feed animal. You eat it. Do we eat horses? Is that what they're there for? We have horses so that we can eat them?
Not with chariots. You're not going to eat them with chariots.
Well, but again, we don't know what they do with the chariot. We have no idea.
The Egyptians used chariots.
Well, of course.
Wouldn't it be the same thing?
Again, talk about the New World. Not in the New World, it wouldn't be. We don't have wheels in the New World. We don't have wheeled vehicles in the New World. We know that the Mesoamericans knew the principle of the wheel and the axle, but they're all small. We have absolutely no evidence that they ever had any large conveyance with a wheel. So whatever a chariot was, it probably didn't have wheels because nobody had wheels. And even if we don't have the wheels surviving, we've all seen the ruts that the wheels make. The Roman roads have ruts in them where the wheels wore down into the stone. The Mormon pioneers, their wagons would make the ruts. If there were a lot of wheeled conveyances going over certain places, we'd see the evidence that they'd travel. It's not there. Not there at all. They have in Mesoamerica, particularly in the Baten, what they call the Sakbe. A Sakbe is the white road, and it's called the white road because it had white lime on it. But it's this beautiful, long road that clearly somebody used for something. Zero evidence that there was ever a wheel on it. And again, because of the nature of the covering, if wheeled vehicles had been on it, we could tell. They would leave evidence. No evidence. Next thing is, in every culture that has had a horse, it has transformed culture. You ride horses. They change agriculture. Everything about your world changes with horses. Horses are just way too powerful. And anywhere they've been in the world, they have been transformative of the culture. Doesn't happen in the Book of Mormon. So what is a horse? I don't know. I know what the English word means. What does it mean in the Book of Mormon as a word that was translated? What did that translated word mean? I don't know, but I don't think it was a horse. A horse doesn't do horse-like things in the Book of Mormon, and it should. If it's going to be a horse, it should have transformed culture. Never did. Everybody walks. Nobody ever rides. Arnold Freeberg, beside the artist having the Helaman on big horse with the guys marching by and looking at all kinds of buff like we all wish we could. So yeah, horse never does horse-like things, and that's in the context of skin pigmentation. Skin pigmentation never shows up in any action in the Book of Mormon. So yeah, the word skin and the word black is there. It's our fault that we read it that way. Was it racist the way we read it? Yes, it's racist the way we read it. Was it racist the way it was written? No. Now, were the Nephites racist? Absolutely. It would be really unusual if they weren't, but they were racist towards anybody who was Lamanite, had nothing to do with skin color. They're racist the same way that the Greeks and the Romans were racist. We are better than you are. I really don't care what color you are. So yeah, skin pigmentation, that's a new one that has a very long and very sad history. And we, as a Latter-day Saint people, got involved in that long and sad history in the way we read the book. And just like people used the Bible to justify chattel slavery in the United States, many, many Latter-day Saints use those phrases to also exercise racist feelings, understandings, relationships with other people. Not the way it was written.
Okay. All right. So let me make sure I'm clear on your books. So you've got...
Yeah, let's go back to the books now.
Let's go back to the books. So Plates of Mormon, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Plates of Mormon is basically starts with the Book of Mosiah and then ends with 1st and 2nd Nephi. It's basically based on the translation.
We start with the Book of Mosiah, and then we have Words of Mormon, and then 1st Nephi.
And then it's kind of a study Book of Mormon. You've got different footnotes in there to add context.
Yes, and there was one review of it from the Association of Mormon Literature, and the result of it, he says, well, this probably shouldn't be the first Book of Mormon you read. And I would agree with that. I think you should read a different one first. But if you're someone who has read the Book of Mormon multiple times and you're saying, I need a different perspective, I'd like to see this with some different eyes. This is when you want it. Okay. The sentences are different. There are so many intricate phrases and sentences that have subordinate clauses in them that they become difficult for many of us to really follow. So in a lot of cases, I put parentheses in so this is in parentheses. That actually helps with understanding the text. So if you would like to see it with different eyes and sometimes see things that you hadn't seen before, because it's punctuated differently, because we have the "and it came to passes" as paragraph markers, I think you'll experience the text in a different way. And then the footnotes will talk about why this word's there. So just to finish that thought, it starts with the printer's manuscript, but in places where we know where we can get a better reading from the original, I put that in.
Oh, the original manuscript.
Original manuscript.
Of which we only have 28% of.
Yeah, and then footnoted.
Okay.
The other thing that I did, that it's the only edition that I know of that has done this, when you go through Isaiah, there are places where italicized words have been removed. I marked those with empty brackets.
What do you mean removed?
That if you were to read the text and look at it in the King James Version, you'll come across a word and the word's in italics.
Right.
If you read that same thing in the Book of Mormon, that very same verse, the word that's in italics is gone frequently.
Oh.
And it's not there. It just silently removed. And I sort of made it loud. Sort of like, there's a word missing here. You should know. If you're going to, read this and kind of try to understand how it compares to Isaiah, you should know that there was an italicized word here that's been removed. And sometimes what happens when you remove the italicized word is it requires rewriting something else to make the sense of the word that you took out. But every once in a while, they just remove, Joseph removed the word, and you are left with now an incomplete sentence where, we really needed that word, but it's gone. But anyway, so those are marked.
Well, and I'm just wondering, I don't know if you're familiar with either Grant Hardy's Study Book of Mormon or David Hawking's Annotated Book of Mormon. Are you familiar? That's a Heartland one. You won't.
Yeah, I know that one. I have not read that one because I have some philosophical reasons for not reading that one.
But just wondering how yours would compare to those. So yeah, you don't know about David Hawking because
I don't know really what he does with it. No,
Okay.
specifically. I have both the Maxwell Institute version and Grant Hardy's annotated.
Okay.
I know something about both of those.
So how do you compare with those?
Both of those are study Bibles in that they are trying
Study
to—
Book of Mormons.
Yeah, excuse me, yes. Study Books of Mormon, Book of Mormons.
I guess it's Books of Mormon, technically, but most people say Book of Mormons.
Yeah. Yeah. We'd have
Probably bad grammar, but we like to
Yeah,
say
who
that
knows? Yeah, whatever we're going to call them. Those books are study in that they are trying to help you understand a passage and change the language or give you some enriching information. Mine, as a study edition, is this is what the words are. This is what the text looks like. This is an incomplete sentence. You can't make sense out of this sentence. So it's all to get an experience with the early text. So I guess if I were to compare it, it's probably much more comparable to Skousen's earliest text.
Oh, yeah.
But his earliest text doesn't show you the work. So, when you have a teacher who says, I want you to solve this problem, but I want you to show the work, Skousen shows you the solution to the problem. He doesn't show you the work. And I'm trying to show you the work. Okay, why is this word here? Well, this is where it comes from. This is what it is. This word is illegible, and so this is the best guess, that kind of thing. So yeah, this is a much more textually oriented, trying to get back to an early reading rather than to say, here's what Nephi meant when he said this. If you want that kind of thing, I have a commentary that you might like.
Oh, and that's the commentary.
Okay. So that's a full commentary. And of course, the difference between a commentary and a study version is 6 volumes versus 1 volume. In 1 volume, it says, here's some help.
Okay.
Commentary says, here's more than you ever wanted to know.
So I'm glad you mentioned Royal Skousen, and because I was just last week they spoke at BYU.
Yeah.
And Stanford Carmack actually was interesting because I've heard some people say, and especially Stanford Carmack, this kind of stuck out to me. He said that a lot of the clunky English there was instead of there were, for example. If you go back to the Tyndale Bible instead of the King James Bible, the Tyndale's the earlier version of King James, essentially. The Book of Mormon matches that kind of grammar better. And I remember when I listened to this, I was like, and so what's the point? Like we're explaining away the bad grammar of the Book of Mormon using Tyndale. Is Joseph copying the Tyndale Bible, or I don't know. Can you comment on that? I'm putting you on the spot, huh?
You're putting me on the spot. And what nobody listening to your podcast will know is that Stanford and I have had exchanges over this, and we disagree vehemently. And he is not fond of my opinion.
Okay.
And so whatever I say now will not be authorized by Stanford Carmack. Okay. And you should go to Stanford to get his arguments because you should get it from there. You get them from the horse's mouth and not my opinion of them. So I get to give my opinion because you asked me.
All right.
There are, I think, 2 reasons why that argument has come up. One of them, both Stanford and Royal Skousen are of the opinion that when Joseph Smith did what he did and called it translation, that he was actually reading a text off of the seer stone that he had no relationship to. that somebody else created that English text, and Joseph simply read it. Joseph was a reader. He had no participation at all. There's nothing of Joseph in the Book of Mormon.
So Stanford and Royal Skousen are some of the few people who are going with the tight translation model.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And when you read Skousen's definition of tight translation, what he means is not the way we have interpreted his meaning.
Okay.
So when we talk about translation and we talk about tight translation, we say very close to the words. That's what we mean. Tight translation is if it said horse, it became horse. There's a one-to-one correlation in the translation, very tight.
Which is what causes all the anachronism problems that we were just talking about.
It does, yes. That's not what he meant. Technically,
that's not what Skousen meant.
Skousen. Technically, and oddly enough, he's the one that came up with the terminology that we use differently than he said.
Tight and loose.
Yeah, loose is pretty close to the way he meant it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's close enough. It's tight where what he really means is transmission, not translation. It is a tight transmission. We have what was on the seer stone, and there was a tight transmission of that. Joseph read it correctly and spoke it. And the scribe may have wandered a little bit and spelled it incorrectly and had to be brought back, and every once in a while probably put the wrong word in. And then some of them where we really don't know what it is. For example, we know that there's a homonym between straight and straight with S-T-R-A-I-T and A-I-G-H-T, and we get the G-H-T, and we've had all kinds of theology trying to say why that's right, and it's a spelling error. But anyway. But transmission is what he really means. And so both of them start with the presumption that Joseph didn't do anything. This is the way it was. The second one is, this is really bad grammar. Okay, this is poor grammar in 1830. Oh man, what do we do? Here's a divine book, and everybody has always made fun of the grammar. Well, if it wasn't Joseph, if it was actually translated early, you can't get mad at grammar for a grammar from a couple of hundred years ago, because that's what it was. And so now we have an explanation for why the grammar is there that removes the taint. And so it's not God doing this bad thing. Somebody else did that. Now,
somebody, not God, gave us bad grammar. Is that right?
No, gave us correct grammar for early modern English.
For William Tyndale.
Tyndale, somebody else, and some people have said, based on this argument of early modern English, that it was Tyndale in the next life who did it. I've heard Moroni as a translator.
Moroni had bad English grammar.
Yeah, for some reason, Moroni, who finally learned English, managed to learn English in the 1600s, but forgot to update it to the 1800s when he was going to talk to anybody. You can tell I don't like the argument.
Okay.
The problem I have with the argument is it simply takes every single question that you have about the translator of the Book of Mormon, moves it away from anything that we could know, sticks it over here and says, it's a mystery and we'll never know. Yeah, and it raises so many questions. If God could give a translation 200 years ago, why couldn't he do it 200 years later? If God could have had someone, if you've got a lot of time in eternity, don't you think you could change your language and learn the way we speak now? Don't you think you could do that? It just ruins everything for how to understand it. Now, the next question is, are they right? Is it early modern English? Do we have elements of early modern English? And the answer is absolutely yes. So the question becomes, well, how does it get there? Well, they say it got there because it was a native speaker of that who did it. That's not the way languages work. Language does not have a drop-off point where it says, after this point, you shall never use they was. I'm trying to remember some of them, but yeah, a lot of the phrases that you have in the Book of Mormon, they was, I have heard in my lifetime with a native speaker of English say they was.
They weren't college educated, though.
We presume not. We hope not. I have known some college educated that might have done that. But these forms get preserved because they're possible in English. They're not proper English.
Right.
We try to get rid of them. We try to educate them out. But they're there. They persist. These are always possibilities. So can you find them? Yeah, of course you can find them. When I was growing up, there was a big thing about saying ain't. These just not in the
Ain't a word, and you ain't supposed to say it more
exactly
than 3 times a day.
Well, it was, again, it's a very good early modern English term. Very good. But we don't like it anymore, and so we educate it out. But that doesn't mean people stopped. It kept going. And so I think that's where a lot of this language comes from. Well, where's the next thing it comes from? Well, it comes from the fact that very, very clearly the Book of Mormon tries to sound like King James English. It makes an attempt and sometimes doesn't do it very well, and so it makes some mistakes. Well, what kind of mistakes made the same kind of mistake that were made a few hundred years ago, back when we hadn't decided they were mistakes yet? Well, it also does some things that are correct, that were also correct a few hundred years back before we had decided that they were correct or not. And so because the Book of Mormon makes an attempt to sound like the King James Bible, we will get those things in there. We will get archaic sounding language, and we'll get things that don't work. So originally, what Stanford Carmack had said is, we have this in the Book of Mormon. Nobody else does this. Joseph couldn't have written this because nobody could have created these forms. And then, to his good credit, he goes to look at other people who were imitating King James English. Well, he found those forms. And then what the argument became is, well, they're more statistically prevalent in the Book of Mormon. These other people don't use them as much. Wrong argument. If they use them at all, it was available. Now, how often you use it, that's completely, idiosyncratic. Any two of us will have words that we use more frequently than someone else, phrases that we like better than, and it'll change over our lifetime. Well, if you ever go back and read something you wrote, you go, well, yeah, I remember writing it. I would never do it that way now. But because people were imitating the language, they were coming up with these forms and sometimes making mistakes, and it was poor grammar. So that's where the argument is. It really is there. I will go with what Royal Skousen said in I forget which of his publications, but he said, is the Book of Mormon an early modern English book? No. Royal Skousen says, no, it is not early modern English. The language in it is demonstrably early modern English in its forms, and you can look at it, and as a description of the language, I think it's useful. Just like I thought it was useful to point out where the italics were missing. If you're a scholar and you want to look at this stuff, this is cool information. It's a description. It isn't evidence of translation. It isn't evidence of who did it. This is, it's information. When Skousen says it's not an early modern book, he said, we cannot tell the time frame because the grammatical elements will cover hundreds of years. If you have an element that was correct, 200 years, and then 100 years later, it had already changed, and you get both of those, which time period? Well, you got to go with the newer one. So he said that, you can't tell what time period the early modern English is. It covers way too wide of a range. And he said there are no words in the Book of Mormon that are not knowable to Joseph Smith and his environment. Unlike the Bible, which will have early modern English words, and the only one I remember is besom, because I remember reading that and thinking, I don't know what a besom is, and I think it's some sort of a broom or something. Anyway, besom. Not a word I use very often, but it's an early modern English word, and there aren't any of those words in the Book of Mormon. So is the Book of Mormon an early modern English book? I will go with Royal Skousen's statement to say no, that it isn't. Does it have early modern English forms in it? Yes, as a description. Does that tell us how the Book of Mormon was translated and that Joseph could not have participated? No, it does not. Other things tell us that he did. Now, that gives me a segue where I can go back and talk to my book. Can I do that?
Bring it back.
Talk about my book. Actually, I was thinking at one point in time I was trying to put some of this information in about early modern English in the book, and there's a little bit.
This is the other book?
The Engraven Upon Plates.
Okay.
Engraven Upon Plates, printed upon paper. And the title is supposed to give you the idea that there are more than one element that is part of the Book of Mormon. There's more than one time period involved. One of the things that I think is really fascinating that shows Joseph Smith's participation in the process is what Royal Skousen saw in sentence constructions that he was talking about repetitive resumption. And in repetitive resumption, you will have a sentence that starts in some place and wanders, and then you've got to get back to the original. And so you take the words that you began with, and then you repeat them. And that kind of brackets this wandering in the middle and lets you get back on track. And it's called repetitive resumption. I'm resuming by repeating something. And he specifically talks about it at the sentence level. And if you go through the Book of Mormon, and this became obvious to me because I was doing all of the sentences and because I'm looking at this going, the heck do I do with that? They become noticeable. You see both the sentence fall apart, and then you see how it comes back together. You also see incomplete sentences in the Book of Mormon, where you look and you go, I can't make a sentence out of that grammatically makes sense. It just wanders and falls apart and just fades. And Royal Skousen noticed that in his analytical variants. So, I'm not the only one that's seeing these things. But then the question is why? What happens? All of the sentences that fall apart have more than 3 internal clauses. Joseph seemed to be able to hold information in his mind to repeat over 3 clauses. He could get that out. If you had more clauses, he seems to have lost the way. And sometimes was able to remember how it started and do repetitive resumption. And sometimes it's sort of like, okay, well, next. And so if you're trying to explain these sentences, both the repetitive resumption and the ones that fade into oblivion, and you look at them and you say, what do they have in common? They have all these interruptive clauses. Now you go in...
These gospel tangents?
Non-gospel, grammatical tangents. There we go. Tangents nevertheless. What happens is he can't keep that in memory. And it turns out if you start looking at memory and what short-term memory is like, we have a mechanism in our short-term memory that allows us to keep lists of things, and it can be like 5 to 7 lists of items. But we have a finite capacity in our short-term memory. If we have memorized something, we can go longer. But in short-term memory, we start falling apart because there's only so much you can keep in that short-term memory. We know it's a limitation. And most of the studies have been on the intake function. How much can you remember coming in? If I give you this list, how much of it can you remember to send out? But we produce language, it's an external mechanism rather, not just an intake. It's a production mechanism. And so in the production of language, we go through short-term memory, and we can lose our way. And that's what happens. Well, who's going to lose your way if you're reading? Those sentences should be perfectly fine. If Joseph is reading a sentence, if the person who wrote the sentence gave you a complete sentence, Joseph would read it. So if you have these incomplete sentences and the ones that require repetitive resumption, you can't be reading. You have to be in oral dictation. It has to be something that Joseph is doing. And so those sentences, I think, are absolute indicators that Joseph Smith was participating in the process of translation. We can argue about how, but I think that is evidence that his mind was there and that Joseph Smith, that person, was intimately involved in the production of the language of the Book of Mormon. And the evidence is these things that only show up if you have to go through human short-term memory and you don't get it when it's been written down. Has to have been oral. Has to have been Joseph producing it.
See, this makes me want to... And I know we need to go because we got to wrap this up.
Yeah.
But
one of these days we should stop.
I know. So William Davis, Visions of a Seer Stone,
yeah.
Because he is big on oral transmission, and I'm hearing a lot of parallels with William Davis. I know Brian Hales has real problems with William Davis, but it sounds like you really match him quite well.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think there are absolutely elements of oral production in the Book of Mormon. I think the problem is what William Davis did is he said, this therefore explains the Book of Mormon, and it doesn't. And here's the part that I wanted to get to because I think this is the most fascinating thing. I just talked about repetitive resumption on the sentence level as being the reason why you can say that Joseph Smith's mind was present. That very same principle of repetitive resumption tells you that there was a written original that is being translated. So there is a written original that is being orally translated. And this is where I will differ from Davis.
See, that doesn't sound different to me. That sounds very similar.
It isn't. It isn't. What Davis says is there was nothing ever written down. He said he may have written down the notes, or perhaps I don't. At least the way I read Davis, he doesn't think that Joseph ever wrote out a text
beforehand.
Yeah,
well, yeah, that's true.
I mean, and everybody talks about how Joseph, could have, and there's reasons to wonder about that.
Not everybody, but anyway.
Yeah, I know.
Some critics would maybe.
But here's the point I wanted to make. There are several times in the Book of Mormon where repetitive resumption is not on the sentence level, it's in a textual level, and it marks insertions. And you will get some that are only a paragraph apart. And there's one in, the short ones I'm not going to remember. There's one about Korihor where there's an aside. And so it'll say this, there's this little aside, and then we get back. And so I was talking about Korihor, and you get this repetition. We missed this one because of the way Orson Pratt divided up the chapters. He divided a chapter that didn't originally had a chapter division here. But we all remember the what we call the monetary units. It's more weights and measures, but
right.
An omni equals this, and a xenum equals that, and your eyes glaze over.
Because you're like, this doesn't have any reference.
Yeah, turns out that is an insertion that Mormon put in. For some reason, he thought we needed to know that. And I think there's a reason. We'll do on the next video.
You're coming back in October, right?
Yeah. We'll be back. We'll be back. But what's really important about this is that this is part of repetitive resumption. He sticks this huge thing in. I mean, we've got a whole chapter of this stuff. And there is a line, and there's a line. Those two things, if you go back to memory, are so far apart that it taxes memory too much to hold them in memory. They had to have been written down. The original author had to have put those down. So there is a written text that an ancient author wrote that has these long repetitive resumptions. And those are evidence that there was a written text, but then it gets translated orally, and we see where Joseph's mind is not finishing certain sentences.
Okay.
But what I thought fascinating is here's this same principle that says, yeah, oral translation, got to be a written text.
Well, very good. I hate that I'm running out of time because could keep going for at least another hour or two. But we're going to have to just wrap this up. Hopefully I've twisted your arm hard enough to come to Bomza and Logan.
I'm still working on that.
Okay. Well, and maybe, because I just found out, literally it was like 2 days ago, there's no chance I had of reading one book, let alone two.
Yeah, right.
And I'll try to ask you some better questions. But it's been great having you on, Brant. I'm glad we finally got to meet in person.
Yeah,
Let's
was
not
fun.
make this a one-time thing.
That sounds good.
Well, thank you so much for being here on Gospel Tangents. Remind people the names of the books and where they can get them.
The names as I remember them: Plates of Mormon, which is the reformatting of the printer's manuscript with other notes and formatting structures in it, and then Engraven Upon Plates and Printed Upon Paper, both of which have subtitles that I can't remember.
I'm going to have to see if I can get a copy of them from Greg Colford Books.
Yeah, Greg Colford Books is the printer on both of those. And It was a struggle to get them out because we put them out at the same time. But they are intended to complement each other. You can have them separately, but the idea is if you have both of them, they kind of feed off of each other. And one says, here's what's happening and here's what it looks like when you see that formatted in text.
Okay. They're available on Amazon, probably.
Yeah, Amazon. Yeah, I know for a fact Amazon has, they've got to be anywhere you normally buy books.
Okay.
Including Colford.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
and Colford tends to have sales around Black Friday, so watch for them. Then they'll be cheaper.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. All right. Well, Brant Gardner, thank you so much for being here on Gospel Tangents.
Thank you. It's been fun.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Brant Gardner. We ran out of time, and Brant came back a few weeks later. So in our next conversation, we're going to continue where we left off and talk a little bit more about his amazing 2 new books.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's really important to remember. And when I get to the next life, Orson Pratt and I are going to have a conversation.
Okay.
Because I think he did not do us any great services by chopping up the original chapters. You have to put them back in the original to understand what's going on.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt, so check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.